Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will talk about the housing association that calls me too late. At 4:50 in the morning, the phone on my nightstand rattled hard enough to nudge my glasses off a paperback. I thought it was a wrong number, or maybe the neighbor's kid locked out again. I thumbed to answer and croaked a hello. A woman's voice launched in like she'd been revving for a runway takeoff. "This is Odessa from the association. I need you to bring the keys to your mountain gate in 10 minutes. We're parking 2 cars on your farm. My family arrived early." I blinked into the dark. 10 minutes? 10. We're in the lower lot right now. Don't make this complicated. Everyone uses overflow when the holiday crowd hits. It's your turn. I sat up. The room was that pre-dawn gray where every corner looks patient and suspicious. My dog, Birch, lifted his head, stretched one paw, sighed, and went back to the important work of sleeping like a log. "Let me be clear," I said. "You're asking for my private gate keys so your family can park on my land because they got here ahead of schedule." "Exactly," she said with the clipped patience of someone who thinks politeness is a coupon you can only use once. "I'm the president. We have emergency authority." "There isn't a parking emergency," I said. "There's a planning failure." She gave a small laugh like a click. "I'll be expecting you in 10. "Odessa," I said, "this call is being recorded. Tell me again what you want." Silence, a huff, then, "Fine, bring the keys so we can access your gate. 2 vehicles, temporary. The association will not be liable for damage." "So you want access to my land and no liability," I said. "At 5 a.m. 5 o'clock now since you're wasting time." She hung up. I stared at the phone. The brain fog burned off all at once, the way it does when a car backfires outside and you realize the sound isn't entirely harmless. I swung my feet onto the cold floor and felt that thin line I keep for myself, between nice neighbor and property owner with a spine, firm up like a drawstring. Background you need to know. I do own a mountain parcel up the ridge from our little development. The parcel is an old farm cut from a larger tract, not inside the homeowners association, not subject to the covenants, not part of the common anything. There's a locked gate at the base of a switchback, a gravel drive that leaps up the hillside, and then a hidden meadow where I keep 2 sheds, a little off-grid cabin, and a tired orchard I've been coaxing back to life with mulch and stubbornness. I've got trail cams for wildlife and weather sensors because I'm a nerd about my trees. The gate keeps out people who mistake open country for a giant shared glove box. I also have a history with Odessa's board. Not dramatic, but memorable. They once tried to fine me for a chicken coop on land that wasn't theirs. I sent back a polite letter, certified mail, with a copy of the plat showing my parcel in heavy marker and the recorded covenants that stop short of my fence by a good 100 yards. The fine went away, no apology attached. I also showed up at a meeting last spring and asked them to fix the potholes in the lower road before they spent thousands on new brick around the entrance sign. Odessa, eyeliner sharp enough to slice citrus, told me potholes were scheduled after more urgent aesthetic concerns. That was the night I realized our board liked pretty things more than safe tires. Back to 5 a.m., I didn't jump to panic. I started documenting. I opened the Notes app and wrote the exact time of the call and what was said. Then I called the non-emergency number for the county sheriff. A calm voice answered on the second ring. "Hi," I said. "I'm at the mountain parcel off Ridge Spur. The homeowners association president just demanded keys to my private gate to park her family on my land. I've said no. I'm heading up there because I think they're going to try to cut the lock." "Are you in danger right now?" the dispatcher asked. "No," I said. "I just want it on record. This isn't an emergency. I'm not asking for lights and sirens. But if someone tries to break my lock, that's trespass and property damage. If you have a unit in the area, it might save everyone a long morning." She took my information and said she'd flag it. "If you see anyone tampering with your gate, call us again while it's happening," she added. "And please don't confront anyone if you feel unsafe." "Copy," I said. Then I texted Odessa so that the record wasn't just a phone call. "You do not have permission to enter, park on, or otherwise use my privately owned parcel for any purpose. Any attempt to cut or bypass my gate is trespass and will be reported." I pulled on jeans, grabbed a hoodie, slipped my phone into a chest pocket, and took my thermos off the counter where last night me had been wise enough to leave it full. I keep a small file folder ready for nonsense like this. Copies of the recorded plat, the deed, snapshots of the gate and signs, and a letter from a land surveyor I hired last year to retrace the boundary after a windstorm knocked down a line of old fence. I tucked the folder under my arm and on a last-second impulse clipped my little action camera onto my hat brim. It's not glamorous, but a smooth video beats a jumpy cell phone if you need to show an officer where someone's hands were when bolt cutters made an appearance. By 5:07, I was jogging down my porch steps to the truck. Dawn was a rumor, just a thin suggestion of light over the eastern ridge. The association's lower lot runs along the base of the hill, right where the county road ends and the private mountain spur begins. When I pulled in, I saw two SUVs idling, fog making little halos around their exhaust. A third vehicle, not a tow truck thankfully, but a contractor's pickup, sat crooked, its bed stacked with orange cones. 3 figures stood by our sign, big letters warning private road, no through access. One of them was Odessa. She had a scarf wrapped high, a travel mug in hand, and the posture of someone who wakes up already disappointed in you. A man in a tan jacket, Trent, the vice president, held a clipboard like he was about to audition for the role of guy who invented homeowner forms. The third, a younger man with a patchy beard, leaned against the contractor truck, hands in his pockets like he'd been dragged into this to earn forgiveness for some minor sin. Odessa straightened when my headlights swung over the gravel. I parked under a lamp, left the truck idling for the heater, and stepped out with Birch on a leash. He's protective in the sense that he'll lean against your leg so you remember what loyalty feels like. "You're late," Odessa said. "It's 5:12, I said, "and I brought documentation." I held up the folder. She ignored the papers, eyes fixed on my hands. "Keys," she said, like a cashier who doesn't have time for folksy conversation. "Hard no," I said. "This is private property, not common area. There's no emergency that allows you to use my land as overflow. If you had a genuine emergency, like fire or rescue, you'd be calling first responders, not me. I am willing to be neighborly, but this is not neighborly. This is entitled." Trent exhaled like a coach who'd told the team to expect exactly this play. "Look," he said, "parking is tight this weekend. The board agreed last night to use every available option. There's a historical footpath across your land that was used by the original owners." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "There's a recorded utility easement for the power company. That's it. Everything else is rumor and wishful thinking. The parcel was carved before the association. It is not encumbered by the covenants. You don't have the authority you think you have." He tapped the clipboard. "We have a resolution. I couldn't help it. I laughed once. Not loud, not cruel. Just the sound you make when a raccoon opens your freezer like it owns the place. You can resolve all you want about property you govern. This isn't that." The younger guy shifted. "Odessa, maybe we should—" Odessa cut him off with a raised finger. "We're done wasting time. Where are the keys?" "In my pocket," I said, "and they're staying there." "Then we'll have our contractor open the gate," she said, turning to the patchy beard guy. "Cut it and we'll replace it later." My camera was already rolling. I didn't move. "You attempt to cut that lock and I'm calling the sheriff." "Call them," Odessa said. "We have emergency authority and this is a common necessity." "Common necessity is not a legal term," I said gently. "Trespass is." She took a step forward. "You're about to make a lot of people angry." "Angry isn't illegal," I said. "Trespass is." We stood there in the breath cloud of our own impatience. A bird tried out a morning song in the trees like it wasn't sure the day deserved it yet. From the contractor's truck, the younger guy murmured, "I'm not cutting a private lock. That's not what I was hired for." Odessa's head snapped toward him. "We'll find someone else then." Birch leaned into my leg. I felt his warm weight and a small wave of calm washed over me. I took a breath. "Odessa, for the record, you do not have permission to access my land. Any attempt to enter will be trespass. I'll make a second record of that now." I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency line again, speaker on. The dispatcher recognized my number before I finished explaining and told me a unit was en route. Odessa rolled her eyes. "Wonderful. Now we're all going to be late because you want to play lawyer." "I want to play owner," I said. Within 5 minutes, a county SUV rolled up, quiet and solid and official in the way that makes arguments less fun for bullies. A deputy stepped out, tall and broad, with the weathered calm of someone who's stood in mud at worse hours and dealt with worse ideas. He introduced himself as Deputy Dax and asked for a quick summary. I told him. Odessa told him, with added flair. He listened. The way real listening sounds like you're building a shelf inside your head. "So the parcel is not part of the association?" he asked. "Correct," I said. I handed over my folder, the recorded plat, deed, and a letter from the surveyor. "There is a utility easement," I added, tapping the map, "but not a general right-of-way." He skimmed, nodded, looked at Odessa. "Ma'am, unless you can show me a recorded easement or court order granting you access, this is private property. I can't make him give you keys, and cutting the lock would be criminal mischief." Odessa tried a different angle. "We're not trying to steal anything, we're trying to park." "Which would still be trespass," he said, not unkindly. "I get that today is busy, but this isn't a police matter the way you want it to be. This is civil, and the civil side looks like he owns the land." Trent stepped in, tight smile. "Deputy, what if the association is willing to indemnify the owner?" "Doesn't change ownership," Dax said. "Doesn't change consent." Odessa's mouth tightened. "Fine, we'll go park along the county road," she said, in a tone that suggested she'd now accuse the county of ruining Sunrise. "The county right-of-way is posted on that stretch," Dax said. "I'd recommend you don't. I can't promise tickets, but I can promise the road crew is crabby by 7 a.m. Odessa swung her scarf tighter. "This isn't over," she said to me, like life is a play and she likes the curtain calls most. "I agree," I said, because I knew a letter would be waiting by afternoon, and I wanted her to hear I was already braced. They rolled out, the contractor shaking his head as he followed. Dax stayed long enough to take my statement. He asked if I wanted to press charges preemptively for the threat to cut the lock. I told him I'd settle for the incident number and the advice to call if anyone touched my gate. "Do you mind if I take a photo of your no trespassing signs?" he asked. "It's helpful for my report." We walked to the gate. The metal was slick with dew, my padlock a small weight against the cold chain. I keep 2 signs, one with the standard warning, another that explains in polite language that the parcel is not part of the association and that access is by written permission only. It's the friendly version of a fence post. He snapped 2 photos, nodded. "Between us," Dax said, "they come on strong, but once it's clear there's a file and they can't bluff you, it usually settles." He handed back my maps. "You did everything right. Document, call us, stay calm." "Thank you," I said. "You want a cup of coffee? Thermos is full." He smiled. "If I say yes, I'll be here till noon." I poured anyway. We stood in the fog, sipped, and watched the shape of the mountain lean out of shadow. Birch, who believes every deputy exists to scratch his ears, leaned into Dax like a furry brick. Dax obliged. Then he left and I hiked up to check the cabin because if someone had come through overnight, I wanted to know. The farm was fine. The trail cam had caught a bear lumbering past the orchard just after midnight, uninterested in anything but whatever bears think about when they're alone with their paws, and the world is quiet. I did a quick walk around, tightened the latch on the shed door where wind had worried it loose, and breathed the kind of air you can't buy. Cold, clean, a little bit like pine, and a little bit like honest work. By 7:30, I was back home with Birch fed and me showered. At 8:01, as predicted, a message popped into my inbox from the association's generic address. Subject: Emergency Authority Exercise. Courtesy Notice. The body of the email was a masterpiece of wishful legality, full of phrases like community necessity, temporary accommodation, and good neighbor policy. It also claimed I'd been uncooperative during an emergency event and suggested a compliance review at the next board session to address my refusal of reasonable access. I read it twice. Then I drafted a reply with a politely formal tone that I save for people who think they can talk over a deed. I attached the same documents I'd shown Dax, plus a screenshot of Odessa's text, plus the incident number from the sheriff. I wrote in simple sentences that my parcel was not subject to the covenants, that any attempt to access it without written permission was trespass, and that there was no emergency that permitted a private association to appropriate private land for overflow parking. I told them I would attend their next open meeting to correct the record if they intended to discuss me in my absence, and that if any board member or agent tampered with my gate, I would pursue criminal charges and civil damages. I asked that this message be included in the official record. Then I did 2 more things. First, I printed everything and sent it certified mail to the association's registered address, because paper that requires a signature is a language some people understand better than email. Second, I called my friend June 2 doors over, who knows every moving part in our neighborhood and stores gossip like a librarian stores maps, by date and clarity. "What now?" she asked, not even pretending she thought I was calling about morning recipes. I told her. She said a word that wouldn't pass breakfast radio standards, then apologized to the air. "They tried that last year with Archer," she said. "Wanted to store some showy planters on his lawn for a weekend event. He told them his grass wasn't a warehouse and they backed off. Odessa doesn't like being told no. She has that complex where saying it louder makes it truer. Any idea why they didn't use the community lot by the pavilion? It's half empty most days. Because Odessa likes it empty, June said. Makes her look like she runs a tidy ship. Figures, I said. I'm going to the open meeting. You free next Thursday night? I wouldn't miss it, she said. I'll bring cookies so we look civilized while we're sharpening pencils. The rest of the day did that thing days do when they start weird and then pretend they didn't. I worked. I nodded along on a video call while a guy named Kellen presented charts that all said the same thing with different colors. I refilled the bird feeder. I pretended not to recheck my phone every half hour, waiting for Odessa to escalate. The escalation came, but not the way I expected. At 3 p.m., a neighbor texted me a photo of 2 men at my gate. One of them was Trent, clipboard king. The other was a guy I didn't recognize wearing a vest with reflective stripes. They weren't cutting the lock, they were measuring it. The text read, "Spotted at your place. Looks like they're taking notes." I called the non-emergency line again. "They're not cutting," I said. "But if they're measuring to cut later, that still makes me nervous." "Do you want a patrol to swing by?" the dispatcher asked. "If one's available," I said. "I'm at work and can't get there for an hour." By the time a unit rolled through, the men were gone. The deputy, different from Dax, left me a voicemail saying he'd driven the spur, didn't see anyone, but had logged it. It wasn't the satisfying end to the afternoon I wanted. It was, however, one more stitch in the record I was sewing on purpose, one careful knot after another, so when someone tried to tug the fabric out from under me, it would hold. That night after dinner, I did the unglamorous part of standing up to nonsense. I read our association's bylaws, line by line, page by dense page. I circled the sections about board powers. I highlighted the parts about open meetings and records. I made notes on the little rules about resolutions and notice, and the big rules about who does and doesn't fall under the covenants. I wrote a short script for myself so that when I spoke at the meeting, I wouldn't either ramble or turn into the kind of person who uses 3 analogies when one will do. Before bed, I walked Birch around the block. The night was mild. A few porch lights were on, not so much for security as to anchor people to each other through glass. As I passed the pavilion lot, the one Odessa loves to keep empty, I had an idea that made me grin into the dark. It wasn't revenge. It was more precise than that. It was a promise to play by the exact words someone else had chosen and hold them to their own script. The sort of idea that, when it lands, hums in your bones like you've tuned a guitar string just right. I went home, wrote it down, and slept deeply for the first time that day. When the open meeting rolled around the next week, the room had more folding chairs than usual. June sat in the front row, a container of cookies like an olive branch. Archer came too, calm as a pond, eyes amused and sharp. I brought my folder and a second copy because someone always pretends they didn't get the first one. Odessa took her spot at the head table with a gavel she liked to tap too often. Trent sat to her right. On her left, a man I didn't know, Giles, introduced as the property manager, arranged a neat stack of paper like he thought tidiness would protect him from questions. The agenda had my parcel listed under Emergency Action Review. I raised my hand before the first sentence got out of Odessa's mouth. "Before you start, please note for the record that the incident you're about to discuss involves a parcel not governed by this association's covenants. I'm here as a courtesy to correct inaccuracies." "Noted," Odessa said in a tone that suggested she'd note it the way you note a mosquito before you swat it. "The board exercised emergency powers to address a parking crisis." "Point of order," I said. "There is no clause in the bylaws granting emergency powers to appropriate private property. There is a clause about preserving common areas during emergencies, which my land is not." A few murmurs in the audience. Odessa tightened her lips. "We requested assistance. You demanded keys," I said, "at 4:50 in the morning." "We asked for timely cooperation," she said. "You gave a 10-minute ultimatum," I said, "and threatened to cut my lock." Trent leaned forward. "We discussed cutting only after your refusal, and only as a last resort," he said, voice smooth with the kind of legalese you learn from 2 seasons of courtroom shows. "Cutting a lock on private property isn't a resort," I said. "It's a crime." Odessa tapped the gavel. "We are moving on," she said. "The important thing is that we resolve the parking without using your land, which should make you happy." "It does," I said. "What doesn't make me happy is your email accusing me of refusing reasonable access. I'm asking you to retract that and enter my letter into the minutes." Giles glanced at Odessa, then at me. He had the look of someone who wants everyone to calm down mostly so he can get home in time to watch his show. "We can attach your letter," he said. "Thank you," I said. "And one more thing. Per the bylaws, since this involves potential exposure for the association, I'm requesting copies of any contracts or invoices for security or contractors hired to resolve the parking last weekend, and any board emails related to my parcel. We'll consult with counsel, Odessa said. You can do that, I said. And you can also comply with the law requiring you to make records available to members. If counsel needs to review them, that's not my clock. June coughed delicately into a cookie. Archer's smile widened by a millimeter. When public comment opened, I took my exact 2 minutes and delivered the little speech I'd written. Calm, clear, rooted in paper. I ended with, bottom line, I will not be providing keys. I will, as always, provide written permission for first responders to access my parcel in a genuine emergency. And I will pursue charges if anyone tampers with my gate. I sat. Odessa moved on. The board spent 20 minutes arguing about dog waste stations like the fate of civilization was at stake. Then they adjourned. People clustered in little knots. June did good work with the cookies. Giles slid over to me with a cautious smile. We'll send those records, he said. I think this got enthusiastic. Enthusiasm is nice in a marching band, I said. Less nice at someone else's gate. And then, when the room had loosened and Odessa had drifted to a corner to hold court with people who always liked the sound of her next sentence, I did the thing I'd written down the week before. I pulled out a small, neat gift bag with tissue paper. Inside was a solid, clear block of resin, the size of a paperback, with 2 old, useless keys suspended in it. A label underneath said, in clean black type, "Keys for the gate, as requested at 4:50 a.m., delivered for the record." I set it on the table in front of Odessa, gently, like a paperweight, because that's what it was. Then I placed next to it a notarized letter addressed to the board, stating that any keys, codes, or devices represented by or attached to the parcel of property, commonly referred to as the Mountain Farm, remained in my sole control, that the object was a symbolic exhibit for the clerk if needed, and that delivery of any actual keys would only ever be made to law enforcement or first responders in a documented emergency. Odessa stared at the block like it was a puzzle someone had crafted just to irritate her. What is this? Malicious compliance, June murmured behind me, too softly for anyone but me to hear. It's proof, I said aloud, smiling. You asked me to bring keys to my gate. I did, and I brought the paperwork to explain why they'll never fit. The resin block lived rent-free in my imagination all week. Every time I pictured Odessa staring at those useless floating keys, a little corner of my soul did a tap dance. That didn't mean I expected the board to fold. People who build their identities on being in charge rarely back down after one neat paperweight. The first shoe dropped 2 days after the meeting, when Giles emailed the records I'd requested. To his credit, he didn't drag his feet. 3 PDFs, 1 zip of miscellaneous communications, and a spreadsheet that looked like it had been formatted during a car ride over potholes. I made coffee, opened the first PDF, and hit the kind of jackpot you hope you never have to use. On one invoice from the contractor I'd seen at my gate, the description read, "Emergency access, evaluate lock, provide bolt cutter recommendation, stand by for instruction to remove chain." There was a line item for an hour of parking coordination, billed at a rate that could pay a small mortgage. Another invoice, different company, listed Overflow Logistics Consulting, and in fine print, a name that rang a bell, the same surname as Odessa's sister, which I knew only because June has a memory like a steel pantry. I scrolled through the emails. There it was, time-stamped 4:56 a.m. the morning of the call. "We can't keep waiting for him to cooperate." From Odessa to Trent and Giles. "Have the contractor meet us at the gate. If he won't bring keys, we cut first, apologize later, I'll take responsibility." Another message from Trent at 5:03. "Let's not write down anything else until we know if he shows." Then a blank line. Then, "This thread will be deleted." I took a screenshot, then 5 more. Then I opened the miscellaneous communications zip and found a photo of the pavilion lot with 8 orange cones blocking every other space. The caption read, "Keep these reserved, we want it tidy." I rubbed my temples, felt a steady irritation bloom. It wasn't just my gate anymore. It was the kind of governance that turns a neighborhood into a stage where one person directs traffic for the pleasure of hearing their own voice. I forwarded the worst of it to myself with a subject line that started evidence. Because if there's one thing I've learned from owning land that other people think they can borrow, it's that you never assume today's neat pile stays neat. Then I called June. "Poor," she said when she answered, Because I can hear from your breathing that something deserves tea. I read her the line. Cut first, apologize later. She inhaled like she'd found a lemon seed where it shouldn't be. Please tell me you're going to do more than write a stern paragraph. Oh, I'm going to write several stern paragraphs, I said. And I'm going to file requests for the board's insurance certificate and a copy of their fidelity bond. If they knew they were planning to cut my lock and still hired a contractor, that's a thing insurers care about. Bless your paper soul, she said. Do you want pie? I have pie. I want to invite a few people to a little educational potluck, I said. At the pavilion, using the official reservation system. Topic: how to read your bylaws and why cones aren't a moral virtue. June cackled softly. I'll bring deviled eggs, the kind that make people listen. I drafted a letter to the board and CC'd the property manager's licensing board because in most states, you can't just call yourself a property manager. You need a license that comes with rules, like don't conspire to trespass. I kept it simple. I attached the cut first email and asked whether the board had sought legal counsel before authorizing a contractor to stand by for criminal mischief. I asked whether parking coordination through a relative's consulting company had been disclosed as a conflict. I said I was requesting the association's insurance carrier information and loss run report for the last 3 years, which is a fancy way of saying, tell me what you've been sued for so I know if we're all living on a time bomb. While my printer churned, I drove Birch up to the mountain farm to swap trail cam batteries. I had swung one camera toward the gate after Trent, and a reflective vest guy scoped it like a project. When I loaded the SD card, a clip from 2 nights earlier popped up. 11:42 p.m. A lanky figure in a dark hoodie jogged up, looked around, and zip-tied a metal placard beneath my no trespassing sign. It read, Authorized access, emergency overflow easement, board approval, the kind of pretend authority that hopes a font can do the heavy lifting. The kid stepped back, snapped a photo, and left. Night vision is fuzzy, but posture tells the truth. 20 seconds later, my second camera caught him again at a better angle. Not Odessa, not Trent, a teenager in a tired hoodie with a faded logo, moving like someone trying to help without making noise. I texted stills to June. Jax, she replied. Lives on the bend. Good kid. Mom is friends with Odessa, which explains the hoodie and the poor choices. I didn't want Jax chewed up for an adult scheme. I left the fake sign in place, widened the camera's view, and called the county code office. Any extra public right-of-way on my road? No. Is posting official-looking signs on private property illegal? Yes, the clerk offered to send an officer. I'll meet them at 10, I said. I'll bring coffee. Officer Leo met me at the base of the drive, brisk and fair. He studied the placard, opened a small toolkit like he'd trained for zip ties at altitude, and said, Impersonating authority signage. That's a no. Want me to pull it? I asked him to leave it until evening so I could show the board, but to document it. He photographed everything and wrote a notice. Remove within 24 hours or face a citation. I slid it into my folder like a small trophy. Birch leaned against his boot while he wrote, which I took as a municipal blessing. Back home, Giles emailed, We're reviewing with counsel. The cut first line was taken out of context. If there was context, it had been peeled off the judgment it should have stuck to. That night, I hosted a Know Your Rules potluck at the pavilion. 27 neighbors showed up. I handed out one-pagers. What counts as a common area? How to request records? Why cones are not law? What an emergency actually is. I told the 4:50 a.m. story. Keys, no sheriff, paperwork. Faces woke up. A man said he'd been fined for leaving holiday lights up until January 3rd, even though the bylaws say reasonable. A woman said she requested competing bids on landscaping and got, that's confidential. Odessa arrived halfway through, arms crossed. I held up a print of her cut first, apologize later email and the contractor invoice referencing bolt cutters. That was a draft, she said. It was sent, I said, and billed. Giles by the coffee said, We do not condone unauthorized access. Good, I replied, showing the photo of the fake placard. Officer Leo documented this and issued a removal deadline. If this is yours, the clock is running. A neighbor murmured, tired but clear. We don't want fake authority. We want fair rules. Odessa left in a small storm of scarf. At dusk, I removed the sign. The next morning brought a certified letter, a compliance review of my non-cooperative behavior, and a proposed fine for disruptive conduct at the pavilion. I mailed back statutes, my reservation and Leo's notice, plus one line. Keep this up and I'll seek a declaratory judgment and fees. That afternoon, a deputy called to close a complaint Odessa had filed about my threats. I emailed the paperwork. 10 minutes later, no further action. Giles's records revealed another problem: reimbursements to Overflow Logistics, a relative of Odessa, with no proof of the 3 competitive bids our old resolution requires. Callie found the resolution. Archer flagged insurance language excluding intentional criminal acts and requiring notice to the carrier. We wrote the insurer, attached invoices and emails, and asked them to remind their insured of its duties. At the next meeting, I submitted Leo's notice, the invoice, and the email. Callie raised the vendor conflict. Giles suspended payments and announced an independent review. I set a tiny resin paperweight on the table. Emergency authority frozen in plastic. To remind everyone that words not in the bylaws don't become powers because you say them louder. The room chuckled. Odessa did not. 2 days later, the insurer mailed a warning to all members about possible denial of coverage. I found Jack skating and told him gently, "Don't let adults send you where their names should go." He exhaled and nodded. That evening, Giles called. The president would resign at a special meeting. Would I help write a real emergency access policy? Yes, with one condition. Emergencies belong to public safety, and nobody enters private property without consent or a court order. The special meeting was standing room only. The resignation letter was brief. Mara became interim president. We adopted competitive bid and conflict of interest rules and a plain emergency access policy. Weeks later, the county fined the association for the fake sign, noting it could be reissued to the individual. I upgraded my gate and added one small sign: private, with permission only. Life quieted. Then a real brush fire hit the ridge at 1:12 a.m. Mara called with an incident number and a request to stage a water tender in my meadow. Yes, I said, opened the gate, and watched professionals do what authority actually looks like. The board recap the next day was crisp. A pie from Odessa appeared on my porch with a note: "For the night with the water truck." It was good. It was enough. Jax began volunteering at a county civics and skate night with Officer Leo. Nico started a quiet text tree for odd-hour weirdness. The pavilion filled with ordinary life. The cones retired. One last resolution arrived: a signed acknowledgement that my mountain farm is private property outside the covenants, and that no board member, officer, or agent may enter or use it without my consent or a lawful order. Sometimes at 4:50 a.m., I still wake and listen for the old ring. Then I look at the resin keys on my shelf and smile. My gate is still my gate. The meadow is still my meadow. The association is still our association, better for having been wrong and then right. Friends, thank you. See you soon.